Hello and welcome to the follow-up session with Harald Ehrlich, I think I got it right, from Tata Steel for the UK, Ireland and Netherlands ECEC breakout session. So on the day of the event, unfortunately, there were some unforeseen technical difficulties, so Harald wasn't able to join the live session, but we decided to do a follow-up asking the same questions that were asked to the panel, as well as the questions that came from the audience. So just as a reminder, the UK, Ireland and Netherlands breakout session was on the compliance communications challenge. So using communications to build trust in your compliance program and encourage an ethical culture. So I will now hand over to Harald to give a short introduction about himself before we go to what was asked in the live event. So Harald, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this extra session. I'm very glad to have this second chance to deliver my contribution to this breakout session. My name is Harald Ehrlich, and I'm the Director, Integrity and Asset Protection working for Tata Steel in Europe. Tata Steel is one of the biggest steel producers in Europe and belongs to the global Tata Group, which is an Indian-owned business. In my role, I'm overseeing the investigations in all kinds of wrongdoings, threats, risks, a lot of them based on referral we get from our confidential reporting line. I have two teams, one of them based in the Netherlands, the other one in the UK, and we cover all sites and offices Tata Steel in Europe has. This includes the UK, Netherlands, many European countries, and a number of others outside Europe. A bit about my background. I hold a master in criminology, criminalistics, and police science. Well, basically, I think that's it.
Thank you, Harald. So if we move on to the questions that were asked to the panelists on the day of the live event. So the first one is, how do you set up an ethics and compliance program? So where do you start? How do you communicate it, etc.?
For me, the starting point is at the top, in top management. Top management must send a clear message to the workforce, to the people, that everybody understands ethical behavior, being compliant. This is what we expect, and this is what the core of our business is. When I look into the Tata world, it starts with the Tata head office in India, where this tone from the top, as it is mainly called, is set by saying integrity is one of the 5 core values of the company, and integrity and compliance is being maintained from top to bottom. So I think tone from the top is absolutely needed. We mostly find in larger organizations this tone from the top embedded in the code of conduct. Smaller organizations probably do not have such a code of conduct. No one says that this needs to be a very large brochure. It can be a few statements, but at the end something for people working in the organization to use as an orientation. Top-down communication, and communication plays an important role in deploying every compliance program. Top-down communication is not everything. People have a very good sense for the top managers are saying this and doing something else. So when there are mixed messages, when people experience spoken and written word is different from what we see in day-to-day business, then this can never be effective. Of course, general principles, like we find them in a code of conduct, are not sufficient. You need clear guidance on the topics which typically belong to the wide field of compliance. Is it anti-bribery? Is it anti-corruption? Is it dealing with gifts and hospitality? avoiding corruption by this, but also is it adhering to the rules of data privacy? All this needs to be put on paper in clear policies. Otherwise, people are struggling in translating them, those rules into their practical life. A compliance program can be supported by e-learnings. Of course, learnings in presence are always better, but e-learnings can play an important role in the deployment. But this, and this is a very strong but, what I recommend is don't use an e-learning as a kind of animated slides. This is not the purpose of this. Translate the messages into the world people are working in. By the way, in one of our entities in Tata Steel Netherlands, which is the biggest entity of Tata Steel in Europe, we started now doing so-called ethics workshops, meaning we discuss ethical dilemmas with employees and we tailor them to the respective audience. This helps people to bridge between general principles as we find them in the policies and, on the other hand, their day-to-day decisions they have to make.
Cool, perfect. Thank you for that answer, Harald. Just moving on to the next question. So for you, how important is culture versus policies, and how do you develop that culture?
An interesting question. It starts with culture versus policies, as if these are two poles, and I think both belong very much together. We learned from Lisa Randalls during the main breakout session that an ethical culture is based on a number of, let me call it, criteria. There is, of course, trust in management. There is the way how the company treats employees, the way how the company deals with customers, but also with suppliers. So a lot of cornerstones form a culture. And not to forget, an ethical culture also includes the way how employees look at their management and their company. Do people feel that spoken words and regulations and policies reflect what they see in their day-to-day life? Therefore, culture is a strong element. Culture as such is what people experience in the work they are doing day to day. Is it sufficient to work on a culture? Probably not. You do a lot to maintain an ethical culture, and this maintainment goes along with policies. And now we come to the other end. Policies are clear guidelines what people should do or should not do. Policies can be very strong when there is a culture where people adhere to the policies. From my professional experience, I can say my role exists as people in some pockets do not adhere to the policies or to the laws. And I have to say, written policies and written statements are never as strong as a culture can be. When we, for instance, look into the diesel scandal which happened at German Volkswagen Group, according to the Volkswagen Code of Conduct that time, this should never have happened. But it happened. Shows us that policies play an important role. They are never sufficient. At the end, you have to do more to create an ethical culture. And it starts with how you treat people. It starts with what communication culture you maintain. Do people feel comfortable raising concerns, reporting anything which they are worrying about? Or is this more or less a no-go?
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, I think the culture element is really important, and we see this topic coming up continuously as something that our target audience wants to learn. So from a peer like you, that's really valuable information. So thank you for that. So just for this last question of this section of the panel discussion, before we move on to what the second poll question was, the last question is, who plays a role in compliance/ethics in your organization? Do you have any sort of ambassadors in the business? Who are they? I know you've touched on the training that you've done, but do they receive any particular training? Apologies, that's quite a lengthy question, but yeah, who's sort of involved in it?
When we look into the compliance organization, the compliance department at Tata Steel in Europe, and I think it's probably helpful to understand that Tata Steel in Europe has roughly 21,000 employees. Of course, we have based in our legal department a compliance team. Such a compliance team is, so to say, setting the tone, is organizing training, is reviewing the policies, the guidelines, and all this. Compliance is, of course, not made in the compliance department. Compliant behavior has to be delivered in all pockets of the organization. Is it in production? Is it in quality? Is it in sales? And therefore, we indeed have a number of what we call ethics counselors. This is an informal network of people based in the organization. And this is absolutely needed. It starts already when you try to find the right people for a certain compliance training. You want to reach out to all those who do need this training, who need to understand what is being delivered there. When you miss out a group of people, as you probably don't know the organization or do not know the latest stage of the organization, then this is a failure which can be avoided. Therefore, we use our compliance contacts in the organization, for instance, to provide us always with the latest news who needs to attend which training. But this is not the main purpose, having these people in our informal network. The main purpose is they have a better understanding based on the training they received about what are typical problems related to ethical and ethical behavior, integrity, and compliance. And they know about the red flags. Our central compliance function is always happy to answer questions to help the business, provided people approach them, people bring something to light. And this is where we very much base on our informal compliance champions. By the way, our parent company in India, Tata Steel India, is already a step further. They are now in the process building up a database where they follow up with those compliance champions. They follow up which trainings they have, which activities they do, and they create a forum for networking. So this is probably for us the next stage. When we see look at the compliance function, and this is what I would like to repeat. Ethical behavior and compliance is not made in the legal function. It has to be understood and to be delivered in the business.
That's really interesting. And I guess it's sort of a follow-up question that wasn't necessarily going to be asked to you, but those sort of ethical or ethic counselors, do you think that's done because of the size of Tata Steel, or do you think this could be done a smaller scale for smaller companies? Because I think that's a really good point and really helpful for our audience members that are, you know, nearly as big or bigger than Tata Steel in terms of employee size, but I'm just thinking about it from the companies that aren't as big as Tata Steel. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as to whether that could still, the same thing could sort of be done, but on a different scale.
Thank you for asking this. I think this is a good question, because people sometimes get the impression, in particular when they listen to a session like this, and they get the impression, okay, in bigger organizations, they have resources for everything. The good thing in compliance management is you can downscale. You can downscale, for instance, when it is about written policies and guidelines, make them smaller, shorter, more fitting to the business. And the same applies to such a network of ethics counselors, who, whatever name you give this group of people, nominate people in the organization who have a good understanding of what the local needs are, and train them on this. And whether you have a network of 4 people or a network of 80 people is at the end what you decide based on the size of your business.
Yeah, so the end goal is obviously still the same. So yeah. Cool, perfect. Thank you for all those answers for that first section of the panel discussion that happened during the ECEC. So based on your experience, what do you require from a whistleblower system? What channels do you make available? And what do you require from a whistleblowing line? So I know you've already touched on that a bit, but if you could go into more detail, that would be great.
Mm-hmm. I think there are 3 main requirements for such a system. The first one is very easy, and this means easy to use. Let's put ourselves into the shoes of an employee or a contractor or a supplier who wants to report a concern. This person has, for the moment, a strong interest in delivering their message. But when they start with a system, a reporting system, which is not easy to use, where they are struggling how to put in my text blocks and what to answer, or too many answers, it is likely that people simply give up. We need to put the burden, the hurdle, very, very low, so easy to use for everybody. The second one is strictly confidential and confidentiality. This is what everybody wants to achieve. We call it confidential reporting. By the way, this is also the name of our policy. Confidentiality plays an important role. In my day-to-day experience, I see that more than 70% of our reporters using our reporting line want to stay anonymous. The remainers are willing to deliver contact details, but in all cases, we have to ensure and to guarantee confidentiality, and this needs to be supported by the system. At the end, and this is very important to understand, in most companies, the reporting system is not run internally. Most companies use the branding of their service provider to make sure to the outside world this is an independent service. Very important. There is a third one, which is in the same way important, and this is a detail. It is the mailbox functionality. Most people who report a wrongdoing or a concern want to know at least what was the outcome. And we cannot go back to a whistleblower because mostly we don't know who the person is. And even if we know, we would never contact the person directly. This is a legal requirement. It is also an internal requirement based on our reporting policy. We protect every whistleblower. meaning that a system has to have a kind of a secure mailbox functionality where we deliver a message and the person can then pick it up based on a code and a password. These three requirements are the minimum. There are a few more. I don't want to go into this detail. I just wanted to mention one remaining, and this is from European standpoint, the place where data are stored and where maintenance to the system is made. If this were in the United States or in other jurisdictions outside Europe, this could impose a problem.
Thank you for that, and thank you for those answers. I think that'll be really interesting for, well, as we've seen from the poll answers, why it is important to have one in place. So just moving on to the second question, again, you have touched on this a bit, but how do you manage concerns from managers / union leaders about the potential for denunciation or malicious reports from whistleblowing? So what steps do you take to safeguard confidentiality and anonymity when required?
This is indeed a valid question. In particular, when you deal with union reps or with works council members, this is one of the first questions you get. Isn't there an increased risk that somebody, let's say a disgruntled employee, somebody who has an argument with their manager, that somebody just files something, a malicious allegation against this individual? Even worse, you do not only post one, you post 2 or 3, and by doing this, you try to damage the reputation of this manager, even though a lot in this field happens behind the scenes. And there is not really a complete answer to this. Of course, we analyze reports where we think these are malicious. And we discuss, in particular with our HR function, what to do when we get the impression that a number of malicious reports come in which target a certain individual or a group of people. In general, we have to say, and this was understood and accepted, that the benefit of having a confidential reporting line, a whistleblower line for the ethics of a company is much higher and is more important than concerns about perhaps a few malicious reports. The other question included into what you asked me is about confidentiality. Confidentiality is absolutely key. So what do we do to ensure this? We only have a few people who are dealing with reports coming in. Basically, in the current situation, it is just me who is the first reader of new cases coming in. I then redirect these cases depending on the nature of this. This can be HR, this can be our environmental department, it can be health and safety. The majority of cases will be investigated by us, the internal investigators. What we do and what we report strictly follows the principle need to know. So we protect every whistleblower, even if this individual is willing to deliver their name or their contact details. And this is an absolute must do. Once you would allow information to go out where it should not go, you enclose a name or certain circumstances, then you destroy the reputation of this line, and this goes that quick that you cannot work against it. Therefore, confidentiality is absolutely key.
Yeah, definitely. Again, not to not to focus on the EU whistleblowing directive, but obviously the member states that we have seen transpose it, or even the ones that haven't yet, but this is something that is a continuous discussion point, is that confidentiality piece. So yeah, I totally agree with the importance of that. So just to move on to the last question before we move on to what the audience members on the day of the live event asked. The last one that was asked to the panelists was, how do you provide transparency of outcomes from formal whistleblowings? What kind of reporting do you do internally and externally related to whistleblowing?
When we go back in the question before, we spoke very much about confidentiality, and all of a sudden we reached the point of transparency. Reporting about cases and about outcomes is in the same way relevant. Why? People dealing with investigations need to have a certain level of control about the outcomes and the information related to this. Within TARTA, we have a very clear investigation guideline, and we have a confidential reporting guideline where we clearly say there are certain formal committees that receive the information about cases being reported, the investigation as such, and the outcomes. These people have an obligation, of course, to keep all this confidential, but they also have an obligation to discuss and to review the approach, the investigation approach, but also the outcome. We want to learn from our colleagues. These are representatives from HR, from internal audit, from the business, from management. We want to know, is there anything we could do better? Is there anything which leaves open, and so on? So for us, it is also ensuring the quality and the consistency of our investigations. The reports which have been discussed in this committee then go a step further up the hierarchy to the group audit committee. Why is this the case? It is, of course, not that audit committee is not trusting the organization. It goes back to what we discussed at the very beginning. When you want to have and to establish a consistent compliance culture, then as a top management, you want to know what happens, where are risks, where are concerns, and you want to ensure that the organization is addressing this and investigating all this. So it works both ways. A strong reporting line is absolutely needed to understand where you stand in your company.
Thank you for that, Harald, and thank you for the answers to all those questions. I know it's a bit odd because normally you would have done that alongside Joe and Fiona and Lisa, but again, I'm sure there's some overlap with what they discussed as well. So just to move on to the questions that were asked by the audience members on the day of the live event even, there are quite a few. So the first one is, so we have employees across Europe, but our corporate language is English. Is it sufficient to just communicate our compliance program? So, for example, code of conduct in English?
My answer clearly is no. It is not sufficient to deliver this kind of documents only in the common language, which is English. In our company, we had for a couple of years these documents only available in English and in Dutch. These were the two main languages used in the company. But when we started a new whistleblower service, we clearly took the decision communication which goes to the workforce has to be delivered in the language or languages in the countries, in all countries. And therefore, we delivered our campaign, our posters and our brochures in 16 languages for 15 countries. And I can only say, when you want to achieve that everybody understands the messages. When you want to achieve a good level of deployment, then there is only one chance. Please provide translation. There is one thing I wanted to add to this because I think it is also needed to understand. To do a translation is something you find nice and profound service providers for. It is a difficulty as some words, some terms do not have an adequate translation. It starts with the term whistleblower and it continues with legal terms such as fraud, for instance. So not saying that this is a very easy bit to do, but saving the money for not translating relevant documents means, on the other hand, you cannot trust that people understand or understand in full, and then at the end you cannot trust that these regulations, guidelines are being followed.
Yeah, thank you for that. Again, this is always an interesting question that comes up quite often. So thank you for your answer on that. So another question that was from the audience members was, do employees / workers trust externally managed whistleblowing channels more or less? I guess that's more in your opinion, what you think of that.
It depends on. This is how I see it, and this is a bit a cryptic answer, so needs a bit of explanation. Our experience is that in large organizations, and to give you an idea, our steelworks in IJmuiden has more than 9,000 employees. In large organizations, there is trust into an external service, without any doubt. So we receive quite a number of reports from the Netherlands, but also from the UK. But when you look into smaller entities, perhaps a sales office, a smaller production site, a couple of hundred employees, there we can see that we don't receive any reports or just a few reports. And our view on this is obviously employees in smaller entities have a more direct link to their local management. There is probably also a works council. There is somebody whom they can address directly. And in smaller entities, there is more trust into the local people instead of an external service.
Thank you for that answer. Again, I mean, in all honesty, all these questions continuously pop up. So the knowledge from your side and your expertise is really valuable. So the third question that was asked was, do you think an external, and then in brackets, expert agency would be better for speak up investigations rather than internal employees that only do these investigations once or twice a year?
Well, when it is about investigations, I have the pleasure to lead an organization, 2 teams, where we find a number of experienced and educated investigators, people who have a background in doing investigations, for instance, from the police force. And this is, of course, a huge asset for delivering a high quality in investigations and a high level of professionality. When we look into smaller organizations, they of course do not have investigators in there. And I think for smaller organizations, it makes an awful lot of sense to have somebody externally doing this rather than trying to do it yourself. It starts already with a number of legal questions. Am I allowed to do this and that? And this needs experience, very deep knowledge, and it needs an approach which is consistent with legal requirements. Makes no sense You have findings which look very, very nice and bring a lot of light into the matter being reported, but at the end, a lawyer tells you all these findings cannot be used because the way how you got there is not in line with laws or with policies.
Yeah, thank you for that answer, Harold. So moving on to the fourth question. So this is sort of building on that question I just asked. So about external companies for reporting. In your experience, is it easier for workers to report to a person known to them, in brackets, who is in the compliance department, or someone completely unknown to them?
I have some experience with this, and indeed it is the case that when an audit team or an investigators team is known in the organization, and I mean not only the title of this department, but the individuals acting, then people are very happy to directly contact somebody and say, look, there is something I wanted you to know. So a lot depends on how people trust those investigators, and trust is not something you can organize in a certain way. What we are doing, for instance, by delivering ethics trainings to the organization, there is a very nice side effect because then people get to know these people who are investigating. And all of a sudden, this is not just an email address or a phone number. All of a sudden, they find out, look, this is an individual I can speak to, and this is building trust.
Yeah, exactly. The trust element is super important, as you've explained throughout this whole session today. So that's great answer. Thank you. So the fifth question was, are employees hesitant to become the trusted recipient, especially if organization is a more collegiate run organization?
I do not really have an answer to this, but I have a personal view. When a company has these volunteers who operate as trusted recipients, this is first of all a very positive thing, because these people do not act on a formal basis, but more on a colleague, acting as a colleague, so to say. This is the positive thing, and explains very often the acceptance of these people. But there is also the flip side, and this is about probably the person who this question had in mind. It brings those who have such a role into perhaps every now and then into a conflict of interest. On the one hand, I want to be the colleague. On the other hand, I'm dealing with a certain concern or matter, which is not easy. And I think it is at the end a cultural bit, whether people understand that these volunteers help to sort out with certain problems, or whether they see them all of a sudden as a spy within your own organization.
Interesting. Thank you for that answer. So the last question that was asked, which I think's again probably an opinion or point of view question, which I thought was really interesting. So that morning of the ECEC breakout session, football star, I'm not going to say his name because I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong, made a spectacular TikTok debut, having millions of views in just a couple of hours. So I guess, in your opinion, could TikTok videos become a form of communicating compliance topics within the organization? And if you do have any knowledge, do you know any organizations that have started this? So just before you answer that, Joe did say in the live event that they have used the TikTok format for certain communications, not obviously put it on TikTok, but use that type of format. And I think she said that they will use that type of format from this point onwards. So I don't know if you've had any experience with this or anything.
I do not have a specific experience with the use of TikTok in our organization. What I can say, companies learned a lot about the professional use of social media over the last years. And what companies have understood that means like Facebook and other social media can easily be used to deliver certain relevant information, in particular to the younger workforce. And I think in all aspects of compliance and ethical behavior, when you want to reach out to the whole of your population and the whole of your employees, including contractors and others, you cannot be selective. You have to use all channels because every communication channel addresses a certain part of your workforce. And therefore, when you do not want to exclude younger people, your graduates, your apprentices, then open up to these channels and don't be afraid to deliver the same message in a bit more entertaining way.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Obviously, TikTok is massive everywhere. So when that question came through, I definitely wanted to ask it because I was wondering if anyone had been doing it in the compliance field. So it's very interesting. But anyway, thank you for all of that and all of the answers you gave in the panel discussion bit and the audience members' questions. That was actually everything for today, and I'm really glad that you made this session. And it was unfortunate for the live event, but we can't always trust technology to work. So thank you anyway. It's been great having you on this session.
It was a pleasure to me. Thank you for asking the questions, and thank you in the audience for raising all these questions.